This is a Power 98.7 podcast. Now we're talking. Subscribe to Power 98.7 podcasts in iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. There's more on power987.co.za.
Power Solutions is proudly brought to you by Ntiyiso Consulting. Ntiyiso Consulting. Truth, trust, results.
Truth, trust, results. And that is exactly what Ntiyiso stands for. And it is the final Power Solutions segment. We are joined, as always, in studio by Head of Business and Revenue at Ntiyiso Consulting. That is Mhlanganisi Madlongolwana. I said it right.
It's taken a while, but I appreciate the effort. You know, I'm part of the furniture now.
A beautiful campaign, loaded with information about solutions and finding resolutions, especially in tricky situations. Let's wrap up what the campaign sought to speak to.
So I think thank you for the 6 months. It's been a really great time.
Wonderful.
It's been a really educating time for us as a business, but also for us more than anything else. We committed ourselves to doing a couple of things, which are of course part of our ethos. One is we were committed to ensuring that we have a scientific understanding of the challenges that face businesses, that face institutions, that face organizations, right? And that ultimately is the truth. So everything that we spoke about was based on the science of business, that's based on the science of organization, but was also based on the science of regional economics. And I think that was the last conversation that was had with one of our partners, Mr. Mkwanazi, the last week around building regional economies. And that for us was a very interesting sort of experience. The second thing that we wanted to do, and I think that we've done well and are continuing to do, of course, was deepening those relationships, right? And deepening relationships with potential clients, deepening relationships with the listener. And I think if you look at, for instance, the amount of people that called into the show, I remember the municipal finance segment where we had members of parliament calling in and giving comment on municipal finances. I think those were the kinds of experiences that we wanted to carry. Ultimately, for us, more than anything else, it was being able to problem solve collectively with stakeholders, problem solve collectively with listeners, problem solve collectively with organizational leaders. And you also, sometimes, and I think for us, it's an important one to highlight people who've also then come to us and trusted us anonymously to say, guys, I don't necessarily want to be on air, but I'd like you to help me think about how to set my organization up. I'd like you to help me think about how to drive a specific problem in my organization and turn that around, or structure the organization in the functioning thereof. And so those are the kinds of the relationships that we wanted to deepen. It's been a very interesting period. We've had some really great moments on air as well. Ultimately for us, Dumisang, when you hear Ntiyiso Consulting, you want to hear an organization that seeks to empower the institutions that enable Africa's development. This, of course, is a start to that work.
And Africa's development has become so important. I think the best example of this campaign has been municipal finances. It created that link with the listener that it does not necessarily have to be such a technical discussion around the science of business, but the type of work that Ntiyiso Consulting does is quite technical. But it became important to simplify it so that we as South Africans understand that there is a simpler way of doing business and that our municipalities can definitely do that. How important did that element then become?
Look, of course, as an organization, one of the things we've done well and that we're proud of is that we've built deep expertise in public sector, especially around institutions like municipalities, be it the metros or be it your regional municipalities or be it your smaller local municipalities, to a point where we've prided ourselves, for instance, in helping organizations turn around audit results, right, from adverse findings in the previous year to improved findings in the current audit period. And that, of course, has taken deep work, right? It's taken deep expertise from the colleagues within the firm. It's taken deep expertise in terms of thought leadership and the thought leadership that we continuously share around benchmarking, sort of a municipal finance maturity. But also it's taken deep trust, right, from clients and clients who work with us, who integrate solutions. I do want want to give you this, Dumisang. I was at a client and I was doing a feedback session with one of our key clients in Limpopo.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time when I had started working on that project, one of the things we'd suggested to the client was to set up infrastructure for vendors so that vendors have a hygienic place where they can sell and then the people pay revenue to that. It was the most beautiful sight to behold when we drove into the town afterwards. And that's the kind of impact that we have. And when we say the institutions that enable Africa's development, that's exactly what we mean, right? So if you think about it, is that we don't necessarily speak then about the vendor, when we come to these platforms. But ultimately, the impact that we see with the work that we do, especially with the public sector, is exactly that. It says these are the individuals that benefit immensely when the institution functions correctly, right? When the institution's revenues are up to scratch, when the institution operationally is functioning correctly, but also when the institution is able to think creatively about catalyzing new economic opportunities because they don't have to worry about paying salaries anymore. So that's the one deep expertise that we've built. That's the one that we continue to build, and that's the work that we're doing. But also we've built some deep expertise and deep relationship with the private sector because they're saying, help us think a little differently about our challenges.
It's the time to pivot. So
totally right. Exactly. And you've used that word quite a bit around here. And so they're saying, help us think a little bit differently about the challenges that we're facing as an organization. And one of the things that we speak about in principles for us as a firm is having that deep cultural affinity. Because we understand the challenges of this continent, we understand the challenges of this country, we're able to give tailor-made solutions to the client that comes and seeks our advice.
And those tailor-made solutions are going to be needed, especially on the element that you touched on around building regional economies. We've got the Africa Free Trade Agreement, and there's so much opportunity that exists there. So it becomes even more critical for one's business or even state institutions to have a healthy financial standing. What are you seeing in terms of COVID, especially with entities that are coming to you now looking for this change in strategy or a rethink or imagination that is quite different to the usual way of doing business because we are going into the so-called new normal?
Look, we're not going back to any old normal, if you must. And I think that's the first thing, and that's the first reality that we're seeing. The second reality that we're seeing is that there's a tectonic shift on the ground around how institutions must work with people. And when I say work with people, I mean the following. One, you have situations where ratepayers in municipalities, if you use municipalities, are saying we just can't pay you as much anymore. But also big businesses then saying, I need to find a different value from a municipality. And so we're helping them think about how, for instance, to work on key accounts management around large consumer groups. And that's the kind of work that we're helping our municipal clients think about. But what we're also doing, and I'm quite excited about this, and hopefully we can speak about it going into the future, is also setting up what we would call those round tables. So one of the things that we wanted to do, and this is, of course, why this campaign also came up, we said we wanted to be able to display expertise to the market, but also then build those deeper relationships. And one of the things that we're then doing is that we've set up, for instance, a supply chain management roundtable for CFOs of organizations, be it public or private sector institutions, right? Where we're going to invite CFOs into a roundtable, benchmark some best practices around supply chain management issues, around supply chain management questions, but also share and create a community where people are able to problem solve continuously. Ultimately, organizational leadership is quite a lonely space, and so we're bringing those people into that space. So we'd love for leaders to come work with us on that. But these roundtables then continue. For instance, if you look at the risk roundtable that we're going to be hosting in October, where the CFOs one is on the 22nd of September, and we'll definitely, of course, at the end share contact details. But ultimately here is building that expertise that says we know the topics that we need to speak to. We know what people need, the questions that people are asking, and ultimately building those relationships and being able to share that truth hopefully brings out the results. I'm quite corny today, but I'm going truth, trust, results. No.
I love it because you are giving us an insight really into, a market that sometimes feels like they are untouchable. The roundtable is extremely exciting because it's not so often that you would have a bunch of CFOs or CEOs sitting in a room and trying to problem solve and sharing. It's going to be quite a teachable moment, especially for a discourse that seeks a change in strategy, a change in the conversations that we have and the manner in which we have these conversations. What I also wanted to find out from you really is about the building relationship part of it. It's become quite important for an organization, yes, to have a financial situation that is stable, but it's the people, the bodies. And this is a thread that came up in our previous conversations that COVID-19 has also taught us that you also need to treat your people in a manner that is going to generate a culture that builds beyond loyalty. Are those conversations then being had around problem solving?
People are ultimately what carry most of the organizations through, right? And the people culture, which in fact ourselves as an organization have emphasized quite substantially going into COVID, right? We then realize that at the end of the day, the building stands alone. It's actually the people that drive that organization. So we've done a substantial amount of work to do a couple of things for us as a firm, but also have our clients think about it a little bit more. How do you think about talent management going forward? Thinking about setting up an organization that's functional to a point where people are able to be people, considering that we've lived in a pandemic. Another corny line this evening to Misang, but it's a line that came up in one of our own problem-solving sessions, is how do we begin to lead with love as an organization, understanding that there are deep psychological traumas for people currently in the market, and people are having to, of course, deal with grief. People are having to, of course, deal with a lot of personal issues, but they ultimately still need to remain to the committed to the cause. And so that balance is a very interesting balance that we are beginning to see clients at least coming to us and say, can you help us think about our people strategy a little bit more? How do we ensure that we get the most out of our people whilst ensuring, of course, that they are still wanting to be here for the sake of being here and not just because they need a job, right? And those are the conversations that we're having currently. And what does meaningful work look like? And so sometimes when you think management consulting, you think it's just slides and Excel spreadsheets, but it's ultimately thinking about people culture. It's ultimately thinking about designing an organization that still helps you get your value proposition, but also is able to get you to a point where people want to be here and people ultimately represent your brand. So we've taken Power Solution and we've taken it beyond, and it's quite an exciting time for us.
Absolutely. Talking all matters that are so important because the organizational culture that we have found ourselves in. And, it's one thing to say that the pandemic has taught us many lessons. But when it comes to harnessing a business, you cannot do it without the people. And that's why I think this conversation and the campaign itself has brought Ntiyiso closer to showcasing not only its work to corporate, but as well as ordinary South Africans. Have we achieved what we were setting out to do?
Look, I think the interesting part, and this is, of course, one was catalyzed by our presence on Power Solutions, was to get an understanding of, and a deeper understanding of the SMME market space, right? We've, of course, then gone in and done research on an SMME toolkit that we are developing to be able to roll out for SMMEs to make use of. And the reason why that's the case is that, and we admitted, of course, as a firm, even at the start of our campaign, is that the smaller businesses are usually not the clients that would come our way, but those are the people that make up the value chain that a lot of our traditional clients speak to. That's why you would have seen at the start of the campaign, for instance, we did a lot of problem solving with the smaller SMMEs, helped them pivot. And that's ultimately our commitment as well. One, to ensure that we have the right and meaningful impact. And for us, right and meaningful impact is communities developing, communities benefiting from businesses that run in those communities. Communities, of course, developing from service delivery of the institutions that are entrusted to do that. So for us, more than anything else, the results that we've seen, especially in terms of SMMEs, is the SMME toolkit, which I'm really excited about. Some of the smartest colleagues in our firm are thinking quite deeply about how do you simplify an SMME toolkit and think about it in the context of an ever-changing business landscape. So that's the first sort of impact from an SMME point of view. The second one, and I think is more thought leadership, is that what it's done, and I think this for us is a benefit and not just for the listener or the people who participated, is that it's helped us think quite widely, continuously about our impact as a business as well, right? So you no longer just think about the CFO, who is traditionally the person we're able to speak to, or the CEO, or whoever the case may be, but you also think quite deeply about the communities that they work in, the communities that they service, and we think that holistically that sort of improves our value proposition quite substantially.
Absolutely. You've touched on exciting projects, but the bigger picture for Ntiyiso, it's been a wonderful journey, really, and so much growth. I can only imagine what the near term is likely to be for you guys. So what is it in the immediate term, in the interim, that you'll be cooking up for us?
Yeah, so as I've said, and I think for us more than anything else, immediately in the short term, you're looking at these round tables, right? So you're looking at the CFO roundtable on the 22nd of September. You're looking at our supply chain management roundtable that we're driving to be able to get deeper expertise with the people who may not necessarily want to call into a radio show and say, hey, I'm struggling with this in my business or in my organization. And we're looking, in fact, at a mid-corporatization roundtable as well. But that basically says, how do you take that SMME and scale it to a point where it has continuous impact? Dumisang for us, and I think our CEO said it the first time when he was here, is that we're a 16-year-old business. We've been very lucky to see the substantial growth that we've seen as a business. We, of course, think that we have another 14 years to go in order for us to be able to say the firm is going to outlast us. So you need another 30 years. And so we're thinking quite deeply about those. And we've been very excited to be able to help others think about the challenges that we potentially are also thinking about. But also we are in our own, you know. One of the other things that we're doing is we, of course, are going to be launching in October, and I'm going to invite you because you know I've been spending so much time with you guys, you know.
You are family.
We're going to be inviting you to that brand launch that says we are evolving as a business. We've come into our own. We understand the language. As Zosi would say, we're taking up space. And for us, more than anything else, that represents in the growth of our brand, that's represented in the growth of the stakeholders that work with us, in our clients, and we want everyone to be able to share that moment with us. To say we're here, this is us, and ultimately we're going to walk this journey together, and we're going to empower the institutions that enable Africa's development.
Amazing. I mean, Ntiyiso problem solves. How do you do it internally? How do you come up with the solutions for yourselves? It can't be easy.
It's probably the hardest, actually, when you're not having to deal with yourself as a business. So what we do ultimately, and once again, for us, more than anything else, it's having the honest conversations with yourself. So say, if you're able to see the challenges, tell yourself the truth, right? And trust yourself enough to get to a point where you're looking at the different options and ultimately be results focused. So if you look at, for instance, some of the publication in the thought leadership that we put out, one of the key elements in any thought leadership that we speak about, and even in our conversations as a firm, we'll always point to results to you. We'll say, Dumisang, we did a revenue benchmark report, for instance, which is a tangible result of work. And we think that that ultimately is where the real impact is. Being able to point at something that you've helped a client do, being able to point at thought leadership, or at least be able to recommend a solution in thought leadership if you're writing an article. So any article that you'll see from Ntiyiso Consulting will always be finished off with something that says, we recommend you do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if you're thinking about wastewater treatment, for instance, which is an article that we've just put out recently, if you're thinking about the economic recovery of municipalities, or better yet, if you're thinking about the energy usage strategy of municipalities, where we're seeing a lot more big clients going off the electrical grid, we're having to think quite creatively about those. And so for us, more than anything else, is ultimately speaking the real truth, building that trust, and ultimately delivering those results.
Thank you for always speaking truth, trust, results.
Thank you for having me.
It's been amazing. That is Mhlanganisi Madlongolwana, Head of Business and Revenue at Ntiyiso Consulting. That's how we wrap up the Power Solutions segment. It's definitely going to come back, right?
Totally.
Yeah, it has to.
I just need to get my fingerprints at the door because I'm part of the furniture.
Mara, when you live here? It's 7:30.
Power Solutions was proudly brought to you by Ntiyiso Consulting. Ntiyiso Consulting. Truth, trust, results.
You've been listening to a Power 98.7 podcast. For more podcasts, visit power987.co.za or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.